Greetings, Blender heads! Welcome to another episode of Blender for All. We are going to have a colorful episode this time. When I say colorful, I'm talking about using materials and textures in a Blender model.
In this episode, you will learn how to assign materials to objects, add textures to the materials, use different texture coordinate systems, UV map your object. Alright, we are in Blender right now, and we are going to do a scene with these two house-ish objects. So we're going to take materials and apply it to both objects, but we're going to do this one at a time with two different methods, and I'll explain my method to my madness. But first, let's go out of Blender Render, and let's get into Cycles Render. This will be the preferred method for doing the cycles, rendering, all that stuff. The rendering in the cycles tends to be a lot better, and so I'm going to go with that. It's a lot easier to use too, I'm finding. So first, let's go into this house object. I named it House. Tab into Edit mode. There we go. Oh yes, and we need to go into the Materials tab. And this one we're going to change to walls. Add new materials. Then this one will be roof. Next one will be click on that. Trim. And next one we'll call floor. There we go. So we have four different materials, and we're going to go through and we are going to assign it to each of these sides. So on this, you'll notice that I have trim around the doors and the windows, like that. That's how I'm going to have it. So this is why I constructed it the way I did. So first, we're going to take C for the brush selection, circle selection, whatever you want to call it. Oh yes, I want to escape out of this. Control Tab, I want Face Edit. Now Face Selection mode. There we go. There we go. We're going to do the same for all these other spots here. And you can adjust the size of your tool by doing the mouse wheel and scrolling in and out. So we'll do this to all sides of the mesh here. And here we go. Last but not least, this side. Here's the last. There we go. And now we'll go to walls, and I want to make sure that it's spelled correctly. There we go. We'll assign these. Now I'm going to use nodes on this, and I'll just use the default diffuse. I'm going to change the color so it's a little bit off-white. Now, I want to do the same thing because if you notice, it didn't change the color. And just to give you a better idea of this, there you go. It's still showing up as the white. That is because when we use nodes, we have another setting that comes up. Viewport. So if we take this, we just hover over this and press Control C. That'll pick up that color, and then Control V. Notice it did it to both objects. I want to get this one. But for the moment, I am going to make a new material for this one. I'm going to get this one off, and we'll do a new material. We'll just call this one House. There we go. Alright, and for this one, for the moment, I'm just going to make this sort of a blue material. Control C, Control V, there we go. Now, one thing that's nice with cycles is that you have this real-time rendering that you can do, where you just look at it. It's not really rendering it, but it's giving you kind of a real-time realistic view. You press Shift Z, and then this is what it does. Pretty cool, huh? So you can see this real time as you're applying materials. And here we go. Now, next thing I'm going to do is you notice that all the faces are showing up as being the same color. Let's change this. What we're going to do is we're going to go on our next material, roof. I'm going to do a different color for this one. This one I'm going to make more of a bluish color. And it's going to be much darker. I want to keep it somewhat neutral. So blue is going to be kind of the dominant color on it with this shade. A little bit more red than green. There we go. And now we'll do the same thing, Control C, Control V. And now we're going to do that same selection method where we get C in here in this 3D space. Do the same thing on the other side. And then we're going to assign. And then if we hit A to deselect all, now we have all these sides right here that have that new roof color. Now I'm going to select all these faces. Same type of thing. I'm going to do the trim, assign. Okay, A to deselect everything. And I want to have all these pieces selected. This part might be a little bit more tedious, but we'll get through it. Assign. And make sure not to select the other parts where you don't want the materials assigned. You can go back and correct them later, but best practice, do it right the first time. There we go. There we go. And now, let's go ahead and assign those. And I want it to be a different color, kind of more of a brownish color. So I'm going to take it all the way down for the blue, take it down for the green and the red. Actually, I want to pull it up for the blue a little bit. It's not quite such a dark, kind of mustardy yellow brown. That wouldn't look good. Control C, Control V. And now, we can see that all of our trim material is taken care of. And last but not least, we'll do our floor. And now on the floor, do the same thing. Get the brush much, much bigger on this. Okay, there we go. Make sure that no other faces somehow got selected while we were doing this. This looks good. Last material here. We will assign, and we will change the color. Okay. Alright, and then Control C, Control V, there we go. And then A to deselect everything. And now, you have all these materials that have been applied to this house object. So that's how we apply materials. When doing textures for your materials, take a look at what we have here. We're in the compositing screen, and what we're going to do is we're going to take all these methods, all these materials I should say, and we're going to put them into the nodes. So right now, you don't see anything on here. What we do is we get out of the rendering display stuff and we go into materials display. Here we go. So, if we go into our materials on our properties panel, right now we're in floor. I want to start out with walls. So to add textures to our materials, what I want to do is I want to put shift to what this is going to look like with the rendered results. So right now we just have plain walls. There's no texturing or anything. Now, if we go Shift A to add, we have several things that come up here: input, output, shader, texture, doing all that good stuff. So, and you have several ways that you can do this, but here we go. Let's see. We go through all these cool things, but anyway, I'm kind of getting behind here, kind of going off on a tangent. So, what I want to do is a noise texture. I'll put this in. All right. Then, what I also want to do as well is that I am not going to do this into the color output, or input, I should say. So to do that, we get this really interesting, crazy, funky stuff. Take a look at that. And you get these weird colors and everything. And if you were to do factor, you'd get that same kind of thing, except it would be black and white. See? So instead, I'm going to do a mix node. Add shader. Do a mix shader. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. Shift D. And I'm going to do a much darker shader. Okay, there we go. I'll put this in this next spot. I want to get this out of the way. Now it kind of darkens this a little bit, so it just has a little bit of a mix there. You can mess with that. So you get it darker or lighter. But we don't want to do that. What we want to do instead is we want to texture this. And to do that, I pulled this texture shader down at the bottom, and the reason for that is I'm going to put that factor into here onto how this is going to be mixed. And at the same time, I'm going to take this factor and I'm going to put it into displacement. Now, if we go in, you can see a little bit of idea of what's going on with some of the mix now. You can see a little bit there. You can also change the amount of noise by how scale. So, look at that really quickly. And right now it's at a scale of 5. Now, if I increase the number, you probably think, well, if that increases the scale of the texture, then that means it's going to make it bigger. But in fact, that does the exact opposite. Now, we're getting into what it looks like with a much smaller factor of the scale. Now you see the bumps are much smaller, much more frequent. So, what's happening here is that as I'm applying this material right here, instead of having the scale where it increases the size of the texture, it actually decreases it because the scale is not actually referring to the texture, but to the object in relation to the texture. So if you were to scale the object up, the texture would still remain the same size, but what would end up happening is that the texture would be applied as if it were on a much larger object. So, that is how we apply texture to these various objects. You can do the same thing with this, and I'm not going to do really detailed. I'm just going to get a texture here. That's more noise texture, just to give you the idea of what's going on with this. So, we end up putting it into there. Take this one maybe down to 0.530 instead. especially for the roof. In fact, I could take it a little bit more up. Take it all the way up to 100, and we get this nice tight-knit texture here. So, and then I can also do some other things with this texture. Let's say I want to Shift D, Shift A, Mix Shader. I don't want that to be there. I want that to be there. That's what I wanted to do. And then I can just take this and make this a little bit darker. And there we go. And then factor, we'll put right there. Okay. And so you get the idea as to what I'm doing with this. Okay. So this gives you an idea on how to add textures. Now we're going to talk about the geometry of the textures, how we get that to change around with rotation, orientation, all that stuff. So we can change around kind of the rotation and the scale of the textures as you put them onto the object. Now what I've done here is I've created a checker texture to give a little bit better demonstration as to what I'm talking about when we're talking about the coordinate systems. So first, let's go ahead and add input texture coordinate. So through this, you're going to see all these options that come up. And honestly, some of them you'll use a lot more than others. So first of all, let's take a look at what we have on the texture just as applied to these walls on this object. So if we just do generated, you're going to see that doesn't change. So by default, the generated is what you're going to get for your object. And then you have normal, which comes up. And normal, I don't quite understand. I think it's something that has to do with kind of the oblique angles that anyway, it's not quite something I totally understand. But that one I've seen used on if you're doing, say, a spherical object, for example, and you want just kind of a little bit more pop to your objects. UV, you're not really going to see anything on this one, because all it does is just kind of go to that. So it just goes to real plain. And UV involves a lot more, and we're not going to discuss it in this segment. We're going to discuss it in the next segment when we do a UV unwrap. And then object, you'll notice it's based off the object's geometry, but that one is a lot smaller in the scale than the generated, as you notice there. Also based on the object. And then the next one we have is the camera. Now you'll notice that it's much different on camera orientation. This one, as I understand, it's just going to go kind of rotate according to how the camera is angled. And so I really don't mess with the camera one. And then window is something very similar as well. You get a much bigger orientation on that. So, and then reflection, that's not one that I really mess with either. So typically I'm going to just stick with the generated. So if we go back and we just do the regular textures and everything, then you'll see though that you'll get your generated. It's going to give you a pretty good object. It'll get a pretty good texture for you. And it's generally a pretty safe way to go if you're just going to keep things very, very simple. However, the other method, like I explained, was the UV unwrap, and that one's a very common one, and I'm going to explain it in the next segment. In this segment, we're going to show you how to do UV unwrapping. First, we have this house where we just added the one texture. That was all we did. So, what we need to do now is that we need to give this some life, just like this house that we just did. So to do that, we have a few things we have to do to get this item UV unwrapped. So what is UV unwrapping, or UV mapping for that matter? What does this term UV mean? Well, what it means is that we're going to take this object and all the faces that we have here, we're going to flatten them out and put them onto a table surface, so to speak. This would be like cutting up a cereal box and flattening out and adding these nice painted textures, making it so that it's really cool with, just painted surfaces, and you have a lot more control on this versus if you were to do just a generated texture. However, I'm just going to show you how you unwrap it and how to add the materials on there. So, what we're going to do is we're going to tab into edit mode. We're going to select, no, we're not going to select all. We're going to go from vertex to edge. We're going to get all these different edges. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I am only getting the edges that are visible. So I'm going to turn that off. So now we're not having those back face edges. And if we Alt right click, we do those, Control E, and we're going to mark seams. Now I'm going to do this for this one as well. And here we go. Okay. Now, I have all those seams. Control E, mark seam. Okay. All right. And now I will do the same for these seams right here. Okay. There we go. All right. And now as I'm going through, I'm kind of learning new methods on how to do this. Okay. Alt. There we go. There we go. All right. And I can take the ones that I don't want out. Alright, so we're getting to our last ones where we just clear them out. Okay. Now, these ones will get off. These ones will get off as well. So now all we have left over are our seams. Control E, mark seam. And now, if we press A for all, U to unwrap, and now look at that. If we were to do that with just all these as no seams, it would be a really huge mess of an unwrapped blob. But since we have these all separated into their various parts, what we can do is we can just deselect all, and now you'll notice there's a little bit of overlap kind of over here. Doesn't look so good, but we can take these and separate them out into various parts according to our own preferences. So one thing I love is when we're doing these, there's no right or wrong way. Well, I guess there could be a wrong way, but there's definitely no one right way to do this. Okay, there we go. And now, we separate these out So I'm pressing L to get all these islands selected. And now we can also add a new texture. Call this house. Hit OK. Now, right now, all you see is that blue. Nothing else. If we go in and we do Shift A, we're going to add a texture. And this is going to be an image texture. We're going to do color. And we're going to change this to house for our texture. Now, you can't see it right here yet. It just looks like that blue that we added. That was all. Well, if we were to change the view from our solid, we go to texture instead. Now all of a sudden, it turns black. And that is because we have our black image. And so then we can start painting our image. Now, to do our painting for our texture, we can use one of two methods. We can go into here and paint it on this blank image, or we can paint it in here in our 3D window. Now, the method that I'm choosing is to paint it in here in the 3D window. If we go to texture paint from object mode, then all of a sudden we get the UVs showing up here. But what's nice is we can do it in here. Now if I press T for my tools, I'm going to show you how to quickly select colors that we're going to add to this. So let's go ahead and let's hit this color thing. And now we're going to get the eyedropper. Now, in fact, I don't think I want that shaded. I want that like that. Now if we start painting on here, pretty cool, huh? Now you can see that, and look at that. It shows up in our UV image editor. But there is a slight bit of a problem here. You see all this paint that's happening right here? It's going into places where maybe we don't want it. We can fix that. Control Z. That'll undo all that painting we just did. Oh, that's sad. We just lost it. No, not necessarily so sad. What we can do instead is that we can do a face selection. If we do that, press A. Now we'll start out with the roof and then work our way downward. So I'm going to take this. Okay. Now I'm going to paint on that selection only. F will increase our brush size. There we go. Shift F will get it so the opacity is different. So there we go. Voila. All right. Then we can do the same for everything else. We press A, that deselects all our faces. C will give us our selection. Okay. Now, let's do the same thing where we're going to do the eyedropper. Go ahead and paint all this. A. And now, in our brush selection, okay. First we need to get C to get our brush selection. There we go. That's out. There. Okay. There we go. There we go. Last but not least. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, there we go. And color goes to here. Oh yes, and we want to get rid of this selection. I guess it is out. All right. So now let's begin painting. Alright. Notice how I can do this really quickly once I've just gotten it all kind of taped off. It's like how when you're at your house, and I can see that I just did something else there. I goofed. Alright. But you can see the power of the undo key. Okay. And then, let's go ahead and paint it up. There we go. Now, that's done. Last but not least, once again. Alright, press A to deselect everything. Now we'll just get the trim. There we go. Okay. The windows always seem to be the hardest part. See? For things like that. And there we go. Okay, and that is the last piece we have. Now let's go ahead and let's add the last color onto this. There we go. Oh, yes. Oops. Alright. Paint this up again. Like that. And paint that. And then, voila! There you go. And now we can go back into object mode. There. And now you have this nice UV unwrapped painted object, so you can do painting that way. Now, you're probably asking, well, what's the advantage of doing a UV map versus doing another one? Well, again, you have a lot more control, so you can orient your textures and everything in different ways according to how you wish. And then another way that is really nice for the UV mapping is that when you export your objects, it also makes for some really great control as to where your texture is going to be going. And you can take it to .obj, .3ds, or any of those objects where you're going to be exporting to other programs. So that is the beauty of doing UV unwrapping. Anyway, so that is how we do our materials in Blender. This is a very basic overview, so I'd like you to just go ahead and experiment. You know, see what fits for you. How you do these methods, it's really fantastic what kind of things you can do with materials in Blender. So anyway, so just an overview of what we've done. We've gone over adding materials to Blender, objects, and then next we went through going through textures for these materials. Then we talked about the UV, the other coordinate systems, and then it was UV, unwrapping, and mapping. So thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you leave comments that you enjoyed this, and if you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much. Have a great day.
Hey everyone, if you liked Blender for All, check out more of our episodes by subscribing for new content, or go to shemble.com or check out more of our channel. Thanks, have a great day.